The wind was cold in King's Landing that day, but not as cold as the silence that gripped the crowd before the sept of Baelor. Ned Stark stood atop the platform, his wrists bound, his head bowed in disgrace. The jeers from the crowd stung sharper than any blade. His daughters Sansa, weeping, and Arya, hidden in the masses, were somewhere below. He had confessed to treason-spoken lies to save them, lies he never thought he'd speak. But when Joffrey Baratheon gave that cruel smirk, declaring, "Seer Ilyn, bring me his head," the world shifted. There was chaos, Cersei shouting, Varys rushing forward. Even the High Septon raised a hand in protest. But it was Grand Pycelle who whispered something in Joffrey's ear. The boy king faltered, frowning, and then unexpected command. "Take him to the wall. Let the traitor rot with the crows." The axe was lowered. The guards stepped forward, and Ned Stark's fate was rewritten. As he was dragged away, weak from injury and humiliation, Ned felt no relief. He did not know why the sentence was changed, nor what plots lay behind the mercy. But he knew this. The wall was far, and there was still danger. Not just from the others beyond, but from the poisonous politics of the South that had already devoured him once. The black cells stank of mildew and death. Varys visited him one last time before his departure, robes whispering over stone-like secrets themselves. "You've been granted an unusual mercy," Varys said, voice soft as falling snow. "Some believe your death would make a martyr. Others think your silence is better in the cold." Ned didn't answer at first. His thoughts were far away in Winterfell, on Robb, on Catelyn's angry tears, on Bran, still broken, on Jon, already at the wall. Would he understand what this meant? Varys handed him a small vial. "Drink this before the journey. It will keep you from waking too often. The road is ... unfriendly to traitors." Ned hesitated, then took it. He had no trust left to give, but he needed to survive. The journey north was a blur of rickety wagons, hushed whispers, and chains that chafed his wrists raw. He travelled with criminals, rapists, and thieves, each of them condemned to serve on the wall. They didn't see Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North. They saw a fallen noble, a man whose honor was traded for lies. When they passed Moat Cailin, Ned felt something stir in his chest. The North. He was nearly home, yet more lost than ever before. One night, under a pale moon, a fellow prisoner named Rennell sneered at him. "Didn't know High Lords cried in." "Their sleep," he said. "You keep muttering Winterfell like it's gonna save you." Ned said nothing. He had learned that silence was sometimes the last weapon left to the defeated. Castle Black loomed on the horizon like a dying beast stone, an ice wrapped in perpetual cold. When the gates opened for the new recruits, a silence fell. Jon Snow was among the first to see him. He stood rigid, pale, confused. "Ned?" Jon's voice broke. Ned's eyes found his son's, and in that moment, the weight of everything crushed him. He was alive, but at what cost? Alliser Thorne sneered from a distance. "Another pretty lord come to play at being a crow." The men of the Night's Watch knew who he was. Some resented him, others stared in awe, but none treated him like the Lord of Winterfell. That man had died in King's Landing. Ned stood before the black gate, the wall stretching to the sky behind him, and whispered to the cold air, "I gave up my name, my honor, and nearly my life, and still the war is not done." He took the oath again, not as warden, not as father, but as another lost soul seeking redemption. The words tasted different this time. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. Life at Castle Black was nothing like Winterfell. Ned Stark, now just another man in black, woke every morning in a narrow bunk surrounded by the sounds of snoring men, coughing, and the distant howling of direwolves beyond the wall. It was a strange kind of tormenty, was alive but hollowed out. Every brick of the wall, every cold wind that cut through his clothes reminded him that he was no longer a lord, no longer a protector. He was a failed man buried in black. Jon kept his distance at first. The boy was still reeling from the shock. He had believed his father dead. To see him alive, not as a lord but as a condemned brother of the Watch, had rattled something deep in Jon, and Ned saw it, the uncertainty, the silent questions burning behind those grey eyes. They spoke after a week, beside a dying fire. "You lead," Jon said flatly. "I did," Ned answered. "You said you'd always choose honor." Ned looked at the flames. "And I did. Until the moment it would have killed your sisters." Jon didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "Was it worth it?" "I don't know yet." Training was grueling. Not for the tasks themselves. Ned was still a swordsman, still a Northman, but for the pride he had to swallow. Being shouted at by Alliser Thorne, treated like a fool by boys younger than Arya. There were no lords at Castle Black, just men trying to survive a slow death in ice. Some of the other recruits whispered about him. "That's Eddard Stark," they'd mutter, "the traitor." Others called him the warden who bent. It didn't matter. Ned kept to himself, worked hard, and endured the stares. He had been broken in King's Landing, and now he was learning how to exist without pride. Samwell Tarly took a liking to him, the gentle and soft-spoken. Sam asked questions no one else dared. "Do you think you'll ever go home?" Sam asked one night, as snow drifted through the open cracks of the rookery. "I don't have a home anymore," Ned replied. "Only ghosts." He dreamed of Catelyn's face, not angry but heartbroken, of Robb riding to war, of Arya with Needle, of Sansa in that cursed city. He couldn't protect them anymore. Then came the ravens, one, then another. Dark messages from the south. War had erupted. Robb Stark had taken up arms and declared himself king in the north. Catelyn had captured Tyrion Lannister, and now battles blazed across the Riverlands. Ned's hands trembled as he read the latest Raven scroll. "Robb marches south," he whispered. "He wants my head avenged." Jon was silent beside him. "What will you do?" "Nothing," Ned said, though the words ripped something inside him. "I made a vow." Jon stared at him. "Even now, with your family in danger. That's why I must do nothing." The wall demanded its price, complete abandonment of all ties. But in Ned's heart, the wolf still stirred. He couldn't reach out to Robb. He couldn't warn him. Couldn't tell him of the dangers, of the traps the Lannisters would surely set. And most of all, he couldn't tell him about Jon, the secret that had poisoned his soul for 17 years. One morning, Mormont summoned him. "I know who you are," the Lord Commander said. "I know what it means to have you here." Ned said nothing. "The wall needs strong men, and you're one of the last true ones left." "You think a man who lied to save himself is strong?" Ned asked bitterly. "I think a man who sacrifices himself to save his daughters is." Mormont leaned forward. "We need leaders. Winter is coming, and the dead don't care about crowns and thrones. You'll be first ranger soon, if I have my way." Ned's head snapped up. "I don't want titles anymore." "Doesn't matter," Mormont said. "The wall doesn't. Care what you want. just what you can do. That night, Ned stood atop the wall, looking north. Jon joined him, silent, thoughtful. The sky was clear, and the world stretched on, frozen and unforgiving. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Jon asked suddenly. Ned shook his head. "There's nothing to go back to, and too many truths I left buried. Then maybe we dig them up, together." Ned looked at his son, no longer a boy, but a man forged in cold steel and grief. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe the wall was. Not his punishment, but his test. And deep down, something else stirred an old fire, long thought extinguished. He would find a way to protect his family, even from here. Even if it meant breaking his vows again. The cold had teeth up here. Not just the kind that bit your fingers or made your breath smoke. It was deeper than that. It crawled into your bones, whispered through your thoughts, made your memories feel like dying embers. Ned Stark had lived through winters before, harsh ones, but nothing compared to the cold that came with guilt and silence. As winter deepened, the wall grew quieter. Ravens stopped coming as often. Rumors swirled like flurries, and the Windrop had won a battle, then lost one. Catelyn was missing. The Riverlands were burning, and in all of it, the Lannisters still held King's Landing. Ned read every Raven scroll like it was a knife to the chest. His son was becoming a king without his father. His wife was alone in a world that wanted her crushed, and Sansa gods. Sansa was still a prisoner in that viper's nest. But he couldn't act. He had taken the black, and the wall did not bend for lords or kings or broken fathers. Rangers started going missing. The first was Seer Waymar Royce, then 2 more. By the time Benjen Stark was reported lost beyond the wall, Ned's hands were trembling. His brother gone, it was Jon who told him, quiet and bitter. He went north. He never came back. Ned clenched his jaw. He would never abandon his post. Jon nodded. No, he wouldn't. It became harder to sleep after that. The nightmares returned, visions of icy woods, dead men with blue eyes, Sansa screaming behind a barred door. His dreams had always warned him in their own twisted way, but now they mocked him, and the cold grew bolder. One morning, Ghost came back from the woods with blood on his muzzle. Not animal blood, human. Jon followed the trail and found what was left of one of the missing juice frozen, face twisted in horror. And then the corpse rose. It took 6 men to bring it down, fire finally ending what swords could not. At the next meeting, Mormont slammed a blackened hand on the table. "The dead are walking," he said, "and we are not ready." The others shifted uncomfortably. Some scoffed, others paled. But Ned met Mormont's gaze and saw the fear behind the command. Not fear of death, fear that no one would listen. Mormont called on Ned later that day, alone. "I need someone I can trust," he said. Ned's eyebrows lifted. "You trust a traitor?" "I trust a Stark." He handed him a sealed letter. "I want you to lead a scouting party north. Not for wildlings, for something worse. I've seen the signs. So have you." Ned opened the scroll. Coordinates, instructions, supplies, and a warning, "Don't go alone." He stared at the paper for a long moment. Then he nodded. 3 days later, they left the wall. It was Ned, Jon, Samwell, 2 other rangers, and a guide they barely trusted named Varka. She was lean, sharpened, and scarred from throat to thigh. She didn't speak unless needed, but when she did, people listened. "The dead walk north of the Frostfangs," she said. The wind itself turns cruel. You'll see. Your south gods won't help you there. They rode in silence most days. At night, Ned sat by the fire, staring into the flame like it might show him the path forward. Jon would sometimes join him, quiet and thoughtful. "You ever wonder," Jon said one night, "if the old stories are true, about the long night, the White Walkers?" Ned didn't answer right away. "I used to think those stories were for children. Now I think they were warnings. We just didn't listen." On the 6th night, the wind changed. It came howling, like a beast. Trees cracked in the distance. The guide stopped them. "Camp here, Varka," whispered. "Something moves in the dark." They built a tight circle, fires on all sides, weapons drawn. Jon stood beside his father, blade ready, ghost pacing restlessly. Then, the first scream, one of the rangers. Gone in seconds. Dragged into the trees, another followed. And then the dead came. Not walking, not slow, fast, silent, blue-eyed, and hungry. Ned fought like he hadn't in years. His blade bit into flesh that should not bleed. Sam cried out. Jon held his ground, slicing at the things that once had names. But one got close. Too close. Ned felt claws rake across his chest. He stumbled back. Ghost lunged. Fire caught the creature's shoulder, and then Varka's blade pierced its neck. When it fell, everything went still. 5 men entered the woods. 3 returned. The next morning, they burned the bodies. Jon stared at the flames, face pale. "They're real," he whispered. "They're real, and we're not ready." Ned looked north. His wounds ached. His breath came heavy. "Winter isn't coming," he said. "It's already here." When they returned to Castle Black, the mood was different. The wall had always been grim, but now it felt haunted. The men saw the burns on their faces, the fear in Sam's eyes, and the silence in Ned Stark's steps. They didn't ask questions. They didn't want the answers. Mormont summoned Ned the moment he dismounted. "You saw them?" the Lord Commander asked. Ned nodded. "Too many. Too fast. They're not myths. They're moving south." Mormont closed his eyes. "We have no time left. We need allies. We need the North." "The North won't come," Ned said, shaking his head. "They're fighting Lannisters. My son is too young to understand what waits beyond the wall." "Then you must tell him." Ned looked away. "I swore an oath." "Break it," Mormont snapped. "Damn your vows. This is bigger than honor. This is survival." Ned clenched his fists. That word honor had become a bitter taste in his mouth. His whole life had been shaped by it, and yet it had failed him every time. At King's Landing, his honor nearly killed him. On the wall, it chained him while the world burned, and still he clung to it. But what if it wasn't enough anymore? That night, Jon found him by the fire again. Ghost lay curled between them, twitching in sleep. "You're thinking about leaving?" Jon said quietly. "I'm thinking about writing to Robb," Ned admitted. "I'm thinking about breaking the one oath I swore in blood." Jon stared into the fire. "If you were me, and you had a secret, something that could change the world, would you tell it?" Ned's heart stilled. "What secret?" Jon didn't answer. He just looked at him, searching, waiting, almost begging. Ned reached out, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're not just my son, Jon. You're something more." Jon's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Ned took a breath, then stopped. "Not yet. Not here. Not while they were still surrounded by death. One day," he said softly, I will tell you everything, but not until I know you're ready. The next morning, a raven came from the south, not from Robb, from Stannis Baratheon. It was a challenge on, open letter denouncing the Lannisters, revealing Joffrey's bastard birth, and claiming the Iron Throne for himself. The Watch was supposed to stay neutral, but Stannis had written something else too, a private message, addressed directly to Ned Stark. If you live, and you remember what was lost in the fire, then you know the realm needs cleansing. Join me, help me end this false rule, and the truth will live again. Ned read it twice, then burned it in the fire, but the words stayed. Whispers began among the men. Some thought the Lord Commander was losing his mind. Others feared Ned Stark's presence would drag them into war. Alliser Thorne, bold and bitter as always, spattered aloud in the mess hall. Traitor once, traitor again. The wall's not a place for broken lords. Ned stood, calm. And what would you do, Alliser? Bow to the south while the dead rise in the north. Thorne slammed his cup down. I'd follow the rules. Unlike you, Jon rose beside Ned, hand on his sword. But Mormont stepped in. That's enough, he growled. We are brothers, not enemies. Still, the seeds were planted. Division had begun. The final blow came days later. A raven arrived from the Dreadfort. Roose Bolton had taken Harrenhal, and worse, Catelyn Stark had released Jaime Lannister. Ned dropped the scroll. His hand shook. She'd done it for their daughters. He knew it, but it didn't matter now. Robb would lose the loyalty of the northern houses. The Karstarks would rage. The war was shifting, and the Lannisters, they would use this to claim victory. He felt the walls closing again, trapped, just as he had been in the Red Keep. That night, Ned went to the rookery. He sat at the table, ink and parchment before him. His quill hovered. Should he write to Robb? Should he tell him what they saw beyond the wall? Should he reveal the secret he had buried all these years? Instead, he wrote 3 letters. One to Robb, short, cold, a father's warning, not a general's counsel. One to Catelyn, no anger, just sorrow. And one to Jon. That one he did not seal. He read it twice, folded it, slipped it beneath Jon's pillow, and then he walked into the night, past the gate, beyond the torches, into the snow. Some oaths could be broken, some couldn't, but if the world was ending, he would face it not as a prisoner, but as a Stark. Snow fell in heavy sheets as Ned Stark trudged beyond the wall, his black cloak whipping in the wind like a battered banner of a fallen house. He had told no one, not even Jon. He left the letters, his sword, and his rank behind, all he carried. Now was a small satchel of provisions, a flask of water, and the fire in his chest that refused to die. He was a man who had lost everything, his name, his title, his freedom, but something deeper called to him now, something primal, the North, the true North, where the dead walked and the old gods whispered through the trees. He had not ridden. Far before he saw them tracks in the snow, too large for any man, the kind that twisted and dragged, like something heavy moving with a mind not its own. He crouched, brushing his fingers across the cold print. It was fresh, not more than a day old. The dead were close. Back at Castle Black, chaos bloomed like rot. When the men woke to find Ned Stark missing, panic set in. Jon found the letter under his pillow, sealed with wax but bearing no sigil. He read it in silence, eyes scanning each line like he was afraid they would vanish. "My son," it began, "there are truths too heavy to speak in firelight. and burdens I never wanted to pass on. But you are no longer a boy. You are something more. The blood in your veins is older than mine, and you must choose, one day, who you serve, the realm or the truth. Jon folded the letter slowly. He said nothing, but his jaw was tight. His hands trembled. Mormont demanded answers. Did he say where he went? No, Jon lied. But I think he means to warn the North himself. Thorne scoffed. Cowards move, running off to die in the snow. But Jon turned to him, eyes burning like his uncle's. You've seen what's out there. He didn't run, he went hunting. Ned moved through the forest like a shadow, his body aching but focused. He knew these woods, in a way. The trees, the frost, the smell of pine and rot, these were the echoes of home. But here, the forest had teeth. Every snap of a branch could mean death. He camped one night in a hollow beneath an old weirwood, its face long faded but still watching. The wind howled through the leaves, and for a moment he thought he heard his name whispered in the storm. Then he saw the smoke, a distant fire, far to the east. He moved carefully, silently, and what he found chilled him deeper than the wind. Wildlings slaughtered, dozens of them, their bodies strewn across a frozen creek, eyes wide open, limbs twisted. But worse, some of them were standing, not alive, waiting. They didn't move when he stepped into the clearing. They didn't breathe. And then their heads turned. He ran. The snow dragged at his feet. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. But he ran. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew death when it chased him. When he finally collapsed beside a frozen ridge, he barely had time to draw the knife from his boot. But it wasn't the dead who found him. It was Tormund Jonspane, and he wasn't smiling. They sat beside a small fire, deep in a hidden cave lined with furs and half-eaten meals. "You've got stones," Crow Tormund muttered, tossing Ned. "A waterskin, walking alone out here. Thought you were smarter than that." "I had to see it," Ned rasped, "with my own eyes." "Well, now you've seen, and it nearly got you gutted." Tormund leaned in. "You want to help your realm, Stark? Then listen well. The dead don't care if you're a king or a beggar. They just want you cold." Ned stared at the fire. "I need to reach the free folk. Warn them, unite them." Tormund snorted. "You, a black cloak. You're not exactly popular north of the wall." "Then don't tell them I'm a crow," Ned said. "Tell them I'm a man who knows what's coming, and that the war for the living starts here." Back at Castle Black, Jon made a decision of his own. He strapped on Longclaw, packed a small satchel, and saddled a horse. Sam tried to stop him. "If you leave, they'll call it desertion." "I'm not deserting," Jon said. "I'm following. To where?" Jon paused. "Where the old wolves still howl." He left without looking back. Far beyond the frost, beyond the edge of every map. Ned Stark stood with a wildling chieftain, watching the smoke of gathering camps rise into the winter air. The free folk were coming, slowly, suspiciously, but they were coming. It wasn't because they trusted him. It was because the ice was moving, and even they were afraid. For the first time in his life, Ned Stark felt no power in honor, no safety in names. Only one thing mattered now, life, and the war for it had already begun. Snowfall turned to storm. The winds shrieked like dying wolves across the north, as if the gods themselves were crying out for the living. The free folk had gathered in numbers not seen in generations, hundreds, then thousands. Clans who had feuded for decades now huddled together in fear. They didn't come for Ned Stark's name. They came because they'd seen the dead walk, and in the face of that, nothing else mattered. Ned stood before their makeshift war camp with Tormund at his side, his breath frosting in the air. "You sure you're ready for this?" Stark Tormund grunted. "No," Ned replied honestly, "but we don't have time for doubt." Tormund slapped his back. "Then you'll fit in just fine." It took weeks, but they built defenses. Spiked trenches, fire pits, signal horns. They trained men and women alike, anyone who could hold a spear or string a bow. Ned taught them what he knew of strategy, of formation, of discipline. He became something strange to the wildlings, a southern lord who didn't look down on them, who worked beside them, bled beside them. He didn't lead with words. He led with action, and they followed, but not all were convinced. A grizzled raider named Bragg challenged him publicly one night. "Why should we listen to a crow who let his own people die for honor?" Ned looked at him, tired but firm. "I came here to stop the end of the world, not to argue about the last one." He drew his knife and cut a line across his palm. "I bleed the same as you. The dead don't care what we were, only what we become." Brog didn't speak again. Then Jon Snow arrived. He came alone, frostbitten and silent, but his eyes carried the same fire Ned remembered from Catelyn. They embraced for the first time, not as father and son, not as lord and bastard, but as survivors. "You followed me," Ned said quietly. "I couldn't let you face this alone." Ned handed him a sword. "You won't." Their first real battle came just before the solstice. The temperature dropped without warning. Ravens vanished. Fires refused to catch. And then they heard it. The silence. The unnatural, crushing quiet that signaled death's arrival. Jon saw them first, moving through the trees like smoke figures in broken armor, blue eyes glowing. The others, and behind them, a sea of the dead. "Hold the line," Ned roared. The wildlings stood their ground. Fire arrows lit the night. Spears drove back. The first wave, but the dead did not tire. They kept coming. Men screamed. Women wept. But still they fought. Jon moved like lightning, cutting down wights beside Ghost. Tormund wielded his axe like a demon. And Ned, injured, scarred, stood. At the center, his blade slick with blood and ice, refusing to fall. Then one of the others stepped forward, tall, inhuman, crown of ice, blade like smoke. It moved toward Ned. Jon cried out, rushing to help, but another wight blocked him. The other raised its sword, striking fast. Ned barely petted the blow, sent shockwaves through his bones. He staggered, falling to one knee. The creature raised its weapon again, and Ned drove dragonglass into its chest. It shrieked, crumbled to shards, and the tide shifted. By dawn, the dead had retreated, leaving behind scorched ground and too many corpses. The survivors wept not for victory, but for still being alive. Jon sat beside Ned, wiping blood from his brow. "We can't hold them forever." "We don't need forever," Ned replied. "We need unity. We need time." Jon nodded. "Then we ride south. We tell them, all of them." 2 weeks later, they crossed the wall, not as prisoners, not as traitors, but as witnesses. Ned Stark stood before the gates of Winterfell once. Again, his beard was white with frost, his clothes torn, but his eyes burned. Robb stood atop the battlements, stunned. He descended slowly, unsure if he was seeing a ghost. "Father," Ned didn't smile. He only said, "We have no time for reunions." The North must rise not for thrones, not for vengeance, but for the living. Rob nodded. And so, word spread. The dead were real. The wall was no longer the edge of the world, it was the front line. And the man they thought dishonored, he became the first Lord of the North to unite free folk and Westerosi under one banner, not as a lord, not even as a Stark, but as the last wolf who refused to kneel to death. The war for the Dawn had begun.